I think the next few weeks really are huge because you've got 2 tests against the Springboks and then the Bledisloe Cup goes on the line, and let's not forget about that because Australia, that now will become their focal point.
Their first test against Argentina, there were 2 or 3 patches in that game where the All Blacks looked really good, and that was especially set piece. And the line-out, you came out with a stat, we were 15 of 15 or something off our own line-out, which is outstanding.
All I could say is that let's just make it another stag day. Get everyone in there, pack the place out and try and ride your team home.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Saturday night, Eden Park. Look, if you can't get excited for this,
you're not breathing.
No, I look, we do this for a living, Tony. Tony Johnson with us from Sky Sport. And obviously, you know, this is our lives and our working lives for the next however many days, and then the following week after that for the second test and things. But I just think if you're a sports fan of any sport, this is heavyweight boxing. These are the 2 champions. This is Ali versus Frazier again, isn't it? That we go. And both teams come in not in the greatest form. I've pegged it as being the most important All Black match since the World Cup final, but the biggest game of international rugby since France went to Dublin in the Six Nations this year. And I rated that above the Lions playing Australia. But that's just me. I think this is at the peak of what we love about Test match rugby. And you get to call this.
Yeah, well, it is the greatest rivalry in rugby in my mind. And one of the great rivalries in sport, and obviously we can talk about that just a little bit later, but I think even in a year where there was a Lions tour, and you think about how big that is, but in terms of the global picture, given that the Lions only play once every 4 years, they're not representative of one nation, but in terms of the overall picture of world rugby at the moment, yeah, this is the biggest game, and it's one that certainly in New Zealand and South Africa, everyone has been looking at right since the beginning of the year, since it turned midnight at the beginning of 2025.
Yeah, Tony, and you don't treat it as just another game, do you? You and all the crew that get to go to Eden Park. We're the privileged ones because we get paid to go along and do this. And I know we're working, but God, there's no other place you want to be anyway. But and it is an enormous build-up, isn't it? And it deserves it. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, and there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on both of the teams, and it's going to be who handles that pressure best in the Eden Park cauldron. It's going to be about who can make the incremental improvements in their game, and both teams need to make those, but who can handle the occasions, make the good decisions. This is a game like so many All Black Springbok games over the years, are just going to come down to moments. It's going to come down to narrow margins, and yeah, it's just one of those things where you're counting the hours, aren't you? I
want to go through the injuries, and we'll put this up on the side of the screen here, either left or right of me. And this was a NZR press release today. Tavatawa Nawai, fractured radius, out for 12 weeks. That is just such a bummer for a guy who was such a brilliant player during Super Rugby. We haven't got to see him in an All Black jersey. We've all wanted it, and now we don't get that chance. Paddy T, facial fracture 4 weeks, so perhaps Aussie at Eden Park. He comes back. Roy Gard, real bummer, stress fracture, another 3 or 4 weeks. Hotham, 3 or 4 weeks with a surgery on the high ankle sprain. So those guys are out for the next 3 tests. Caleb, even though he played on the weekend, second South African test, they're saying. Luke Jacobson, the same for him. Bauer not required because Tamaiti's back. So, you know, I want to talk about the halfbacks and I want to talk about our wingers because it looks as though we are pretty much stuck with who we've got. But before we do that, just back to what you said about, you know, what can we read into the form so far? Both have played and lost one in the Rugby Championship. Both of us have shown signs during those 2 80-minute performances, Tony, where we've looked really good and we've looked really bad. So it's not like either of us are coming in with raging form.
Neither team has put together a total 80-minute performance. The first 17, 20 minutes by the Springboks at the start of the opening test match against Australia, boy, that set alarm bells off all over the place. They looked so good, but they haven't really been able to replicate that since. Australia, of course, were able to come back. And Australia also made a really good game of it in the second match as well.
Absolutely.
When predictably the Springboks came back, probably had a stronger unit, certainly coming off the bench, went back a little bit to their best formula. So, yeah, some question marks over the Springboks, but also the All Blacks when you'd think, well, okay, they got through the first test against Argentina, having seen off the French, an understrength French team, but there was enough going on there. You think, okay, well, that's probably
a good signs. Yeah, they're good signs, yeah.
A good enough performance, certainly in the first test against Argentina, and then drop their standard in the second in the face of an outstanding performance by the Pumas. So there's question marks over both teams, which you just throw into the mix, and it's who gets their preparation right, who makes those, as I say, incremental. Some areas probably need more than 2 or 3% improvement, but across the board, you're looking at those incremental improvements. Who gets that right goes into the test with a slight advantage, but boy, who that is, it's really hard to predict. There is the Eden Park factor that you have to take into account.
Well, what is that, though? Is that something that we invent? Or is it just a record?
No, it's real because it's something that the All Blacks haven't lost there since they got beaten, by France in 1994. Springboks haven't won at Eden Park since 1937. Having said that, of course, the last couple of times they have been to Auckland, but not to Eden Park. It's actually been a long time since they've played at Eden Park, but it just seems to be a real thing. It's something that seems to bring the best out of the All Blacks and maybe plays on the minds of opposition teams when they're coming in. They always come in with this, look, it's just another football pitch. It's just another patch of grass. But some patches of grass around the world seem to mean more to teams than others.
They do. Yeah. I want to ask you all about, the two coaches, about what this game means, what a win means for either coach, because I believe that we need this more than them. I'll park that for a second. Let's just go to our halfbacks and talk about them. Xavier Rowe's been brought in, Kyle Preston, Finlay Christie. That's it. So we don't have Roy Gutton and Hotham, and I'm not sure about Ratimir. They haven't said yet. I mean, they may spring a surprise. He might come, but we don't know. But perhaps for the second test. So this is a really crucial position, and we don't have our best players, and we perhaps don't even have our 3 best players.
Well, the loss of Roy Gard is huge because he's become such an integral part of the way the All Blacks set up their attack. There's so many parts to his game, his ability to snipe, his strength. He's a strong player, has got a very good pass, but also his kicking game is probably the best out of all of them. So it was always going to be touch and go whether he made it back. Stress fractures, particularly in the feet, can be very difficult to repair, and obviously he's going to be out of action for a bit longer than people were really hoping. Add to that Noah Hotham, and then the doubt over Ratimir. So it could be that Finlay Christie will start the test.
Yeah.
And you can't throw a new guy into that. You can't throw Kyle Preston into Eden Park.
It's been done before, Tony.
Christie's played a lot of rugby there. And I think they'll just look maybe for some improvements in the kicking game will be the biggest ask of him. His ability to get to the breakdown quickly is really good. His ability to clear the ball, particularly sometimes messy ball, very good. It's just that kicking game that will need to be improved. So to me, that looks like that's going to be the combination. We're hearing today too in terms of the Springboks, Faf de Klerk will be back for the second test match. So he's not going to be here for that one. And Bongi Mbanambi didn't make it over with the team as well, just from their perspective as well. So neither team will go in at full strength. I think the All Blacks, though, will go in some way below strength because of those injuries.
When I say that this is the most important All Black game since the World Cup final, and also that there's more on this for us, do you agree with me in that? I think a loss for us just catapults us backwards, and for Scott Robertson especially, it's just so important that this All Black side, which in the last year and a bit under his tenure, is still haven't quite found where they want to be. This is the marker, isn't it? You win this game and so much changes, pivots in that direction. You lose this game, Tony, and there are so many questions which we can't answer at the moment.
So much to be gained from a win. A loss would be certainly amplified by the fact that it's at Eden Park and this incredible run would come to an end, and I think that would cause a great deal of consternation if that were to happen. But I think they'll see this as the challenge. This is we've got to do not just about defending the fortress, but it's about their mana in a way. You could say that they have got to come up with the performance befitting the occasion, befitting the challenge. And as you say, if they come through it, then I think it does clear a lot of debris from around their performance. And I think it's one of those games where it wouldn't matter whether you won it by 1 point or whether you won it by 10 or anything, as long as you get the win. And both sides will be looking at it from that perspective.
What about Scott Robertson? How important is this for him?
Yeah, it's huge. I think the next few weeks really are huge, because you've got 2 tests against the Springboks, and then the Bledisloe Cup goes on the line. And let's not forget about that, because Australia, that now will become their focal point. They will see the Bledisloe Cup as being more important than the Rugby Championship, because it means so much to Australia. You think about the great eras that they've had. They have had the Bledisloe Cup in those eras. So the next few weeks are going to be absolutely crucial for this coaching setup for Scott Robertson, because this is the biggest test that they've faced so far. They faced a very big test on the end-of-year tour last year, which was a very daunting series of matches, but those were away from home. Those were first year. There's a little bit of the honeymoon thing comes, but the honeymoon's over now, and this is where they have to prove themselves. It's an enormous amount of pressure, but this is why you take the job on, isn't it?
In terms of our selection, obviously, taking into account all the injuries, and also the fact that Caleb Clark, who I watched play for Auckland versus Wellington on the weekend. In fact, I watched that Shield Challenge last night as well, and we'll talk about that. He had an okay game, Caleb. Some of the guys from Waikato didn't. And, for being in All Black camp for 3 weeks and then turning up a dud like that is really worrisome. But because Caleb isn't playing, that says to me that the wingers are going to stay the same. And, unless you can see something else. I mean, this is a long-winded way of saying selection-wise, are we just going to see what we saw in Argentina and those guys given an opportunity to rewrite?
Well, it has certainly reduced the options. I thought maybe Caleb Clark had shown enough in one game that they might bring him back in, because he brings a skill set that could be really useful in a test match like this, particularly with his ability to pluck the ball out of the air off either a kick-off or a defensive kick, something like that, but they've decided that he needs another week. They do still have options, Martin. I mean, they could bring Emoni Narawa onto the right wing. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's a change I would make. There's also the possibility, if they wanted to, of moving Jordan to the right wing. I'm not sure that they're prepared to do that. I think they've invested in him at fullback, but that is an option. But then that leaves the question mark over the left wing. What do they do with Rico Ioane? And I think that's the change that most people expect to see, because he's just not playing with confidence at the moment. So do they think, well, Eden Park, it's his turf, you put him out there again? There are other question marks. I mean, the situation at centre hasn't really looked like it's resolved. No. So, in fact, you talked about form at the weekend. And I know it's a big gap between NPC and Test rugby, but Lester Fainga-Onuku as a centre, I think, is going to come into the reckoning at some point later on this year too.
In terms of the loose forwards, Tony, again, with Jacobson and Summer Penny playing last night, and neither of them looked impressive at all. And they've now both been said that those guys are actually looking at, Jacobson especially, second South Africa test, Summer Penny still in the reckoning. But the way that he played, can you see them changing that? Because that's another area where it didn't work against Argentina in the second test like we expected, like it did in the first test. I mean, does Tupu stay at number 6?
It's a chicken and egg scenario, and I know Murray was of the opinion that the team didn't play well, or the backs didn't play well because the forwards didn't allow them. Yep. Some would say that maybe because the backs kicked away the ball or didn't use the ball, that the forwards didn't get a chance to do, particularly their carrying game. So I don't think they'll stray too far, other than the fact that Tyrell Lomax will be back in the picture, and they've got a decision to make. Fletcher Newell has been outstanding, particularly with his scrummaging at tight head. Do they bring Lomax back straight into the front row and then Newell off the bench, which might be the way they look at it? Then obviously Tamaiti Williams, who came on towards the end of the game in Buenos Aires and looked like he was a little bit short of a gallop, but he'll be right. So I imagine they'll probably make those changes in the front row. I think they've got a bit of a decision to make at backup hooker. We know how punishing a ball carrier Samisoni Taukei'aho is, but do they go back to Brodie McAllister as perhaps a more safer option, particularly the technical aspects of the game? I'm told by people who know that he's an outstanding scrummaging hooker, but he's also accurate at line-out time. So I think that's a decision, or certainly a discussion that has to be made. But the one that everyone's looking at is the configuration of the loose forwards. Mm-hmm. Do you stick with what happened, or what they went with in Buenos Aires and just hope to get a better outcome? Or do you make the change? I suspect they will stick pretty closely to what they did in Buenos Aires and hope for a better outcome. And I know that people had question marks about the performance of Tupouva'i. I would say what he gives them is someone who can really cause some issues at the front of the line out for the opposition team. And particularly with Mbanambi not being there, the Springbok line-out hasn't been going all that well.
No.
And that is a part of an area of the game where having Tupouva'i in the mix would be really useful. There's also an option of putting him back to lock. Holland has played a lot of minutes, and he was terrific, but in Buenos Aires just looked a little bit leg-weary, whether they've been able to freshen him up. So that there are certainly some options there, but I wouldn't expect them to stray too far from the mix. It's more about getting a better performance from the players that took the field in Argentina. And, of course, I know people will be calling out for Duplessis Kirifi to be in the mix as well, and that's understandable. So, but I think, to me, it's more about the performance, or as much about the performance as it is about the selection.
How do you expect us to play, Tony? Do you think that, let's go back to the first test against Argentina, because, as you say, 3 tests against France, we were experimenting a bit through there, but that first test against Argentina, there were 2 or 3 patches in that game where the All Blacks looked really good, and that was especially set piece. And the line-out, you came out with a stat, we were 15 of 15 or something off our own line-out, which is outstanding. And then the driving mauls, where we actually had real kind of exerted control over them. Is that what you expect to see again? And in terms of our kicking game, that's the other thing. We kicked away a lot of ball in that second test versus Argentina. Are we going to keep that ball?
Yeah, of course, it's a great strength of the Springboks, isn't it? Their forward game. But I think it's an area where the All Blacks have to have a look, to have a go at them, is in the set piece in particular, but also, ball in hand stuff, and try and create a bit of go forward. Because if the backs try and play that high tempo game the way that they've been playing it, and the mistakes that have come from that, those are the sorts of things that Springbok teams always feast on.
Yeah.
And the other big area of concern, of course, well, the two that really reared their head again, is the discipline thing. And you think back to big moments in test matches between the All Blacks and Springboks, so often there's a disciplinary issue both ways. So they've got to get that right, and I'd imagine they've spent a fair bit of time, or will be spending a fair bit of time, about particularly their defensive aerial game.
Yeah.
Because they've got to get that right, because the Springboks know, and I would expect to see the Springboks go back to that. I don't think
Pollard will be playing. You know that he's hitting the first couple straight up.
And they'll be putting up contestable kicks, which they have done over the last 5 years better than any other team on the planet. And they're going to have to diffuse those. So, but again, and it's an old cliche, but I think it really comes back to who gets the edge up front, gets a chance to dictate the terms to a degree.
Rassie versus Razor, is this just something that us in the media make something of? Because they're 2 great characters. They bring a hell of a lot to a press conference. And, when you actually do this as a job, I mean, we've been through a lot of rugby, Tony, and there's a lot of dull press conferences. These 2 guys provide something, like Eddie Jones. They provide something, and I also thought Checker was like this as well. Shag was like this. They provide something, don't they? They always give you something. But is that something more manufactured from us? Is it actually a factor at all?
It's real. I mean, Rassie Erasmus has got the South African public right in his corner.
As he should. He's won 2
clever,
World Cups.
He's mischievous, Machiavellian also at times, but in a very sort of positive way. Everything has got an end result in mind, whatever he does. He's a fascinating character, but what he's done with the Springbok team, be it as the head coach or the coaching director or whatever role, or the water boy, he was a very good water boy during the last Lions series. He has such a massive impact on the whole scenario, if you like. For Razor Robertson, well, as I've said, this is a guy who rode a wave of popular opinion into the job, but this is where the rubber hits the road. And so this is a time when they've got to come up with answers, that they needed to sit down, and I'm sure they did after Argentina, sit down and have a real hard think about what they're trying to do, whether what they're trying to do is realistic, what are their strengths that they need to play to, what are the areas of weakness or areas that need improving, and just how do we frame the game around all those. And so this is, as you say, this is the biggest challenge yet of this coaching era. And I think that just the signposts coming out of this test are going to be hugely significant, probably for both teams.
Let's wrap this segment up, and then we're going to be talking about our most memorable, or I think the best and worst wins and losses against South Africa, with a couple of other things that have happened over the weekend. And we've been talking about loosely the Southland versus Waikato Shield Challenge yesterday. Waikato went down to Taranaki, won it last week. I mean, this is a period of Shield rugby, which I think is probably the first where it's been changing hands on a weekly basis like this. I'm sure it's happened once or twice before, But who gave Southland, a hope there? They had about a dozen fans in the ground. They turned up. They played hell rugby, including a guy wearing a number 12 jersey, Penny, who can't make the Auckland NPC side, even though he's the best club rugby player in Auckland. But he goes down there and he turns in an absolute performance like that.
It was phenomenal.
He was just like a wrecking ball, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And that was a stunning win. And again, just goes to show what it means to at least the players. I mean, when they celebrate like that with a trophy like that, the trophy's worth something.
Well, you could see that they could feel that it was coming, and what it did was it just lifted their performance so that they got to a level where the intensity of just the way they carried the ball. Tupo Tailoa was the other one who stood out ball carrying. I thought Sean Withy had a fantastic game as well. Manson at the back, he's electrifying. So that was a really spirited performance, and Waikato in the end just didn't have the answers to it. And they go back home now, and straight away
they get the Cantabs.
They get the Canterbury, who were mightily impressive again at the weekend. They're unbeaten. They're on an absolute roll. They look a very well-rounded team. They have lost Cullen Grace. That was really sad to see him going off the field, what looked like quite a serious leg injury, but they'll have the bit between their teeth. The funny thing is, the last time that Southland won the Shield, they took it off Canterbury.
That's right.
And it was
World Cup on the sideline,
2011. At Rugby Park it was played, which was a temporary ground after, obviously, the catastrophe that had taken place in Christchurch earlier on that year. And Jamie McIntosh and his mates, they went there. Similar sort of thing, incredible spirit. And it just seems that the Ramphurly Shield means so much more to some teams almost than others. Yeah. You look at the main centres, they've got the Super Rugby that occupies a large part of the landscape for a year, but it just means so much when it goes to somewhere like Tasman or to New Plymouth or now to Southland. But boy, they're going to have to bring their A game this week. All I could say is that let's just make it another stag day. Get everyone in there, pack the place out and try and ride your team home.
And the Women's World Cup, Black Ferns looking impressive, England looking awfully impressive. Obviously, we've got another round of pool matches and then we get into the knockouts in another week.
Look, impressive first half and then lost their way after half-time.
But they've done enough though, hadn't they?
Well, you could say that, but they made changes. They got into a period of play where it got a bit sloppy. Balls were going to ground. They had the yellow cards. In fact, they ended up a double yellow, so a red card. And they just went through that messy 25-minute period of play, which I suppose it happens, doesn't it, when you're well on top of a game, but it probably shouldn't. The good thing is that they managed to restore order towards the end of the game. And we saw, again, a couple of terrific tries scored by Georgia Miller and Braxton Sorensen-McGee playing at fullback. I think they'll end up with her back on the wing, but they've got lots of options there. Holmes, I think her goal kicking, they're going to need that, Renee Holmes, as they get into the business end. So they now turn around and play Ireland, who they battled a bit before putting Spain away. And it was good to see. At least this weekend they had a couple of close results. Obviously, there was the draw between Australia and the USA. Spain put up a pretty good fight against Ireland. Otherwise, just too many blowouts.
DSPN.